I've grown very close with the commission to the extent like 1 month after we launched the Emmett Till Memory Project on its new version, its current version, the commission cut down its sign at Grab All Landing because they had put up a new one, and that one got shot too. And they put up, and this got some news, they put up a bulletproof sign. And I think it's the only bulletproof roadside marker in the country, to my knowledge. And they held this dedication on October 17th, 2019. And they invited me. I was the only white outsider that they invited to speak at the dedication. And then, what was it, 2 years after that, when the Smithsonian Institution took that bullet-riddled sign and put it in the Flag Hall, their grand ball-side entry of the National Museum of American History, they asked the family and the commission, well, who do you want to sort of host this conversation? And well, they chose me. And so what I'm saying is the development of the Memory Project really can't be divorced from these relationships that did not come naturally. I will stress that. I really had to work to win the trust of the Till family. They get a lot of people coming to them. And I had to work to win the trust of the nonprofit. But when you stick with the same project for 8 years, right, you can do things, you can win some trust that you can't win on a one-time pitch. And so because the family and the nonprofit have worked with me on multiple failed grant proposals, a few successful grant proposals, a couple high-profile stories, like it now just seems like, okay, what's the next thing we're doing together? I'll tell you one great story about working with the nonprofit. For years, they had been meeting regularly since 2005 and keeping regular minutes. And no one had ever seen the full run of those minutes. And as a memory scholar, I'm like, well, damn, this group has done more than any other group in the world. This was true at the time. It might not be true anymore. But at the time, this group had done more than any other group in the world to commemorate the Till story. And I want to see those minutes. And I tried for years to see those minutes. And it's not like it's a public institution. You can't FOIA these things. Right? It's not like there's a building where like they have a administrative assistant who kept the minutes, and she was the one who knew where they were. So eventually I took her out to lunch in Sumner, and we sat right in Sumner Square looking out on the town square. Right across the street is the courthouse, and I just explained what I was doing. And I'm like, I would love to be able to see these minutes. And she's like, well, I have them, but I can't let you see them. You would need to get the permission of Frank Michener. And Frank is a sort of, he was the white co-chair of the commission at the time. And I'm like, well, his office is right across the street. So we finish lunch. I go across the street. I sit with Frank in this beautiful, gracious office. Doesn't even have a typewriter. Like, that's the level of technology Frank is working with here. Because I'll just say that at the end of like an hour of him telling me stories, I said, well, Frank, can I see the minutes? And he said, well, I'd let you see him, but it's not really my call. You'd have to get the permission of John Wiltshire, the Black co-chair. And I didn't know John at the time. And so I said, well, can you hook me up with John and I'll give him a call? And Frank said, no, I'm going to call him for you. And if I call you back, that means you can see him. And I walked out of Frank's office totally dejected. I'm like, there is no way I'm getting a call back. And I was driving back to my hotel, which is like, in Tallahatchie County, that's an hour commute. And my phone rings and it's Frank. And he's like, Dave, John said it's okay. And he just gave me an address and said, meet me at this address at 8:30 in the morning. I'm like, see you there. So the next morning I wake up, plug the address into my phone, and like my phone starts taking me through one of the poorest towns in the Delta, and that's saying something, right? Out the other side of the town for miles into these cotton fields. And all of a sudden I'm starting to get a little bit nervous. I'm like, wait a second. And like the day before I was so excited, it hadn't occurred to me to actually like look up where this address was. I just like plugged it into my phone and started driving. And I end up at this metal building, you can only see cornfields as far as the eye can see, gravel parking lot, one door, a couple windows, looks like a warehouse to me. So I kind of get out of my car, I check my phone, and I sort of walk up and I open the door, and lo and behold, I walk into one of like the single most plush sort of fancy office buildings I've ever been inside. And it turns out that that was the sort of headquarters of the Sturtevant plantation. And if you know the Sturtevant name, Mike Sturtevant ran for Mississippi governor from that building twice in the 1980s. The Sturtevants own a lot of the farmland in the area, and maybe even some of the land relevant to the Till story. And when I walked in, Martha Ann Clark, the administrative assistant, was sitting at the front desk. That's where she worked. And so like she's like, Dave, good to see you. And so she pulls out of the closet these 3-inch binders, black binders. And she takes me back to this conference hall with this like conference table that goes as far as the eye can see, surrounded by all this like big game on the walls. And I'm like getting out my camera and setting up my tripod. And she's like, wait, you can't open those. I'm like, what do you mean I can't open those? She's like, John Wiltshire is going to come and he's going to be here in about 15 minutes. And if you can sell him, you can look at him, but it's his decision. And so I'm like, okay. So 15 minutes pass, John comes, and goodness, the first thing to say, one of my most pronounced memories is John has a thick rural Southern accent. Like I had to pay attention to sort of be able to track this conversation. But he asked what I was doing and why I wanted to look at the minutes. And I explained that I was writing a book, and he was fine with that. And he said, well, what do we get if you look at these minutes? And the timing was perfect, because that $240,000 grant to fund the Emmett Till Memory Project had just come through about a month ago, and it was funding his staff. And I'm like, John, that $240,000 you just got, I wrote that grant. And he just like got this big smile on his face, and he just pushed those black binders across the table and said, have at it, right? And so that is a cool story, because it's like a very concrete reminder that building these projects does not happen outside of relationships with these communities. And it does not happen if, like, forget relationships. It's about like, I was doing things that helped them with what they cared about. Like I was paying I was helping, that grant helped pay staff salary for a year. So once they saw that I was helping them do what they needed, like they didn't have a grant writer on their team. And grant writing, you know, I'm an academic. It's one of my few marketable skills. So the fact that I was willing to sort of lend that skill to their cause, they were willing to share with me those 3 binders, which became like one of the sort of the backbone narratives of the stories I tell comes from those binders. I won't go into all of it. The Martha Ann eventually would not let me look at binder 3 for another year after that, but I eventually got binder 3. There was no smoking guns. Like you spend so long chasing something, you think there's going to be like smoking guns inside them, and there wasn't. There was just good stories and good records of sort of the unglamorous and often invisible labor of citizens working together to do memory work. And that in itself, I think, is a valuable thing.